Well, welcome, Chrissy. Had a great time getting to know you. Chrissy is a guest that I found on social media initially, and loved the content she's putting out. It was much in line with what we do and believe at Hansen Athletics, and I thought it'd be great to have her come on and speak about it, particularly with her background. Chrissy, so go ahead and just jump in and kind of explain to our audience here, your background, what you've done for work, and what you continue to do.
Yeah, absolutely. Well, first, I want to say, Darren, thanks so much for having me on. It's a pleasure to have the opportunity to share my wisdom and share my knowledge. So I started off at a young age playing basketball. I really loved playing basketball and weightlifting in conjunction. But I always thought that I would be a high school basketball coach. We'll flash forward to the end of my college career. Played a little bit of basketball. Wasn't good enough to get a scholarship, but just stayed in it because I loved it, and I was able to get an internship with the WNBA right out of college. So that was a turning point in what I thought I was going to do versus what ended up happening. So I came down to San Antonio and I spent a year as an intern, really on like the coaching staff side of things. So I was in the coaches' meetings, watching them figure out plays, watching them figure out defensive schemes, and doing that trajectory because I still wanted to be a college coach. So I spent 2 years with the Stars initially, and then I moved to Brooklyn Heights, New York. I got a job coaching as a D1 basketball assistant, spent 2 seasons there, and then got asked to come back to San Antonio, this time to do the strength and conditioning for the team. So I was the sole strength and conditioning coach for the San Antonio Stars from 2011 up to 2017, when they sold the team to Las Vegas. So I trained numerous WNBA All-Stars. I trained Olympians. There's probably, I don't know, maybe 5 to 7 different athletes that represented different countries playing in the Olympics that I got to work with firsthand, which was super awesome. And then post WNBA, I started my own business. So now I train female athletes, and I have an adult population as well, runners, physical therapists. And now I also travel the world and speak, because I think that a lot of athletes don't know what it takes to go to that next level. And I don't think that they're being given that education. It's my goal to help bridge the gap between what you're currently doing and what you need to do so that you can take your performance to the top.
Awesome. I love that. Obviously, a very extensive background. One question that popped in my mind as you spoke about that was, as you're doing the internship, as you're helping out in the coach's room, were you doing stuff on the side or getting certifications on the strength and conditioning side just because you loved it, and then that opportunity came up, or how did that transition happen?
Yeah, so I was always interested in the strength and conditioning, and I try to hang around the weight room as much as I could. But like I said, I was more focused on the basketball track at that point. Once I became a college coach, I realized very quickly that it wasn't for me.
Yeah.
So I started doing some things on the side to get my strength and conditioning certification. And then even one of the 2 seasons that I was at St. Francis in Brooklyn Heights, New York, I did the full strength and conditioning for our team. So when Coach Hughes called and said, "Hey, I hear that you've been doing the strength and conditioning. I want you to come back," it was an easy transition because I had already kind of geared my life to go in that path.
Awesome. That's sweet. I was just curious how that development happened, and that speaks a ton to probably your work ethic and willing to be around it so people could pick up on that, and then getting that opportunity as a coach to kind of dive into that. That's awesome. So I wanted to talk through the first video I saw of yours and shared. You kind of talked about your five core principles for athletes. I know you speak about it a lot, so I was hoping that you'd be able to share that with my audience here.
Yeah, absolutely. So I think that a lot of athletes understand that they need to do skill work in order to get better. And a lot of parents and coaches get this too. Like if you're a basketball player, you need to get shots up. You need to work on your defense. You need to go to practice. You need to play on all these teams. The other side that people sometimes forget is those core 5 that I refer to. And these are things that you do off the court to help you really maximize your preparation. So when I think about the core 5 that athletes do in order to separate themselves, I'm talking about strength and conditioning, nutrition, hydration, sleep, and mindfulness. Because I think that as an athlete, if you take care of your physical and mental health, so many other things fall into place. But a lot of times people don't prioritize those things. In fact, a lot of times people leave them off the table altogether. And it's a shame because you're really not reaching your full potential unless you dive into all five of those things.
Yeah, I love all of those. The big ones we talk about with our athletes being in the strength and conditioning side is once we have them in here, we talk about nutrition, we talk about hydration and sleep.
Sure.
But, I'm excited to hear a little bit. I want to hear your opinions on nutrition when you've been working with female athletes and what you typically find even at that higher level.
Yeah.
And then I want to dive into mindfulness because that's one that, I didn't really, you need, but I think we could definitely learn a little bit from hearing a little bit more about how athletes can utilize that and what can come from it. So we can start it off with nutrition and then go to there.
Yeah. So I think when you're talking about nutrition with anybody, you got to be careful about the way that you do it. We're not trying to position foods as good or bad, or we're not trying to put anybody on a track of disordered eating. But I also think that there's a reality to the facts. And the facts are that some foods will fuel you towards performance and other foods don't as much. And so I think when you're looking at nutrition, you got to look at it on a spectrum of like, what foods can I eat and what can I put in my body that's going to help fuel my performance. I actually heard it the other day in terms of valuable. Like, oh, if I'm going to go for a run, I need a food that's more valuable than an apple. Like, it gives me more. It's worth more. And so I think when I talk about athletes, it's helping them understand that, like, just because you can eat foods that won't necessarily fuel your performance, if you did, what would the other side end up being? Right? Like, and I think it's hard for athletes because if you're an adult and you eat a lot of foods that quote unquote don't fuel your performance, you will probably end up seeing weight gain of some sort, right? But when you're an athlete and you're doing all this activity, if you're eating a bunch of sugar or you're eating a bunch of foods that don't fuel towards performance, it doesn't really show up in your body composition in a lot of ways. And so how do we help athletes make that correlation between, hey, if I eat foods that fuel my performance, I might be better in the fourth quarter, or I might have more energy throughout the entire game. Or if I'm playing AAU and I got 3 games, if I start the day off eating Sour Patch Kids, like, I might not have the same level of energy to push through at the end. I tell a story during my my speech. I'll share it with your listeners. But I remember one year we were going to Madison Square Garden to play, and I got some rookies that get on the bus for shoot around the day of the game with bowls of Fruit Loops. And Darren, I almost lost my mind. I was like, Fruit Loops for breakfast on game day? Like, just, I'm in a panic as a strength coach, right? Like,
Yeah.
This is awful, because I knew that wasn't valuable enough for what they were going to be asked to do later on. I knew that wasn't a food that was going to fuel them towards performance. And they looked at me. The one kind of was like, oh, yeah, right, coach. The other one was a little much cockier. And she was like, coach, it's not going to make a big deal. Like, what do you want? Like, I'm still going to have 10 points and 5 assists. Like, what do you want from me? And I looked at her and I said, yeah, you probably will. I said, but what if you were the type of athlete that could have 20 points and 10 assists? Well, we'll never know because you won't put yourself in the best possible position to be successful. And that's what coaches and parents have to get across to athletes. You're not setting yourself up for ultimate success when you don't fuel your body in a way that allows you to have peak performance. And again, you can eat whatever you want, but like, if you're trying to be a peak performer, if you're trying to show up in the WNBA, if you're trying to go play D1, like, those people that are there have changed their nutrition habits to help support that amount of effort and that amount of intensity. And so I think that when you're looking at performance and nutrition, you got to correlate to these athletes that they're leaving something out and they're really missing something in terms of just how good they could be if they fueled themselves better.
Yeah, 100%. And one thing that's interesting is I see even another side of the coin, and I wonder if you do as well, where Most of the information, I feel like nutrition information that my kids are getting on social media, the bulk of it seems to be more of like a bodybuilding type of emphasis or like weight loss. And so
Right.
they just assume that means healthy, and then AKA performance. But a lot of the times when my athletes are trying to do that, like they have good intentions, but we tend to find that they're underfueled and unable to perform, at high level with high intensities and when it matters most. Do you see that with the influences that are, shared with athletes all over just based on social media?
Yeah, absolutely. And I think, Darren, they're just looking at the wrong people to be the expert. And I get it. There's a lot of influencers and a lot of people out there that are saying, do this and do that. And it's probably like an hour and 45 minutes on the Stairmaster and broccoli and chicken. But that person is a bodybuilder that's 3 weeks out from competition. Like that's totally different than an athlete in the rigors of a season that lasts 5, 6, 7 months. I'll tell you what, the number one thing that I would tell athletes that are looking for nutrition advice, find reputable, like Division 1 schools, probably like top 25 programs, and follow the athletic department's nutrition program. Like I grew up in Ohio, a big Ohio State fan. I follow the OSU nutrition page. And so they're showing me what they're feeding the athletes. They're showing me what supplements they're feeding the athletes. They're like giving me all of that information. So I don't think that social media is bad. I just think that you got to follow the right people and get your nutrition advice from the right places. And if you look at their weekly meal plans, which I do, like what are we serving in the cafeteria this week for those Ohio State athletes, you'll see they got chocolate chip pancakes, they got fruit, they got things that an athlete would eat. So it's not all about just eating clean, but it's about like a bodybuilder would, but it's about where are you getting your calories from and how are you fueling yourself on a regular basis. You don't have to be perfect. Like you don't never have to have a sweet again, but you've also got to think about doing it the majority of the time. And that's what I like to talk about. You got to do things the majority of the time. That's enough to get to where you want to go.
Yeah, I love that. That's like an obvious, like that answer, particularly like following, like there's great information out there. It's just like where to sort it through and just going and finding, universities that are doing a good job,
Yeah.
and they're probably putting out a ton of free information that athletes could mimic and make a ton of
Recipes,
progress.
like just different. Here's like protein energy balls that you can make. Here's a Greek yogurt mix that you can make because they're really doing all the work to make sure that their athletes are eating well when they're in their facilities and the food is being provided for them. But also when the kids go home and they have meals that they have to fend for themselves, like what are they eating? So it's like they're doing all the work for you. I look at it like this. Like if I'm a basketball player, I won't follow an archery coach for a weightlifting program. I would follow
Yeah.
a basketball coach. But the problem is these kids are looking at these bodybuilders or these influencers for nutrition advice when they're athletes. And it's like, no, you're not trying to be an influencer or a bodybuilder. You're trying to be an athlete. Therefore, you need to follow someone who's giving you solid athlete nutrition. And you can find it out there. I mean, I'm telling you, all those pages are going to have good information. Just pick one and then run with it.
Love it. When it comes to sleep, let's bounce over to sleep. Obviously, we talk with our athletes just generally about 8 to 10 hours of sleep based on where they're at in their development and whatnot. Is there anything from your experience that you could add valuable to that if they're listening to this or parents are listening to this on the importance of sleep and recovery?
Yeah, I think sleep is probably the number one recovery tool. It's also coincidentally the most underrated recovery tool. Sleep, and then I'd also put in that same category, Darren, rest. We used to
Yeah.
tell our athletes that they would get up in the morning on game day, go to shoot around, and they come back and typically take a nap. So if you can take a nap on game day, that's awesome. But if you can't fall asleep, just laying in a dark room and just resting without being on your phone, without playing a video game, without your brain being stimulated in some way, that rest is, how do I say that? Rest is to some degree a percentage of what your actual sleep would be. So it does have an effect to just lay in a dark room and quiet your mind. So I think that adding in naps would be number one. And then number two, if you can't nap, just get yourself to a dark room, close the blinds, get a little eye mask, and just zone out for a little while.
Yeah. And I think it's important that, with these youth athletes, being intentional with this and having a plan and not just, kind of getting sleep when you can or, whatnot. Because these kids are just so loaded up. Like, professional athlete has their one sport and the things they got to do for it each day. I mean, I train kids that are playing 2 to 3 sports at a time. So sometimes they'll, come in and they'll train twice a week, 3 times a week, but there's days they have 2 sport practices like back to back, playing different sports, and they might actually be getting as many hours of activity or more than an actual professional athlete, right? The intensities are probably lower, but if you don't have a plan, or the parents, if your parents listening, like sitting down with your kid and trying to develop a plan that you guys can both buy into and support each other on getting that sleep. Because I mean, the statistics I've looked at on just injury chances or odds based on sleep, it's pretty crazy. Like, I can't remember the specific thing, but it was, if you were under 8 hours, it was like a 42% higher chance of injury for a youth athlete. So it's a huge deal. And, when I have kids, thankfully I'm kind of tuned into that. So we'll have a schedule for that, but it can be hard to balance all the different sports in school and still getting to sleep on time, getting your homework done and all of that. So
Yeah.
that's
I think we'll touch on parents and their involvement a little bit later, but I'll say this right now, since we're on this topic, like, to the parents, first of all, like, let your kids sleep. Like, don't force them to get up, especially on the weekends. Let them sleep, let them relax, let them recover. I think it's a huge thing. If you look at some of the data, when you're an infant, you need like a ridiculous amount of sleep. Like, the second or third most period in your life when you need close to that amount of sleep is when you're a teenager. And that's a lot of times where these kids are getting 5 hours, 6 hours. So I really think that, one, you got to let kids sleep. And two, if you're parents, you got to be the bad guy with the coaches sometimes. And you got to set boundaries with your kids and with the coaches to say, no, my kid needs to sleep 8 hours tonight, more than they need to come to this practice. But I think sometimes parents get scared that there'll be retaliation because the coach wants every kid to be at practice, or the coach is so adamant that the kid needs to be at practice. But sometimes your best defense or your best setting of a boundary is saying no. And if you're not protecting your kid, then who is? Because coaches, although we love them, we all sometimes serve our own interests. And so the coach selfishly wants the kid there, but you selfishly need to protect your kid and make sure that they get enough sleep. You get the right coach, they'll understand that. And I'm not saying make a huge habit of it, but I think there's got to be a balance of saying no, as opposed to just giving into whatever the sports coaches want, or even the strength and conditioning coaches for that matter. I've had parents call me and say, hey, my kid's got a test, or they got finals this week. It's like, okay, fine. See you next time. Because I can't not practice what I preach. And if I'm saying that that's important, then I've got to live it out when I'm actually dealing with athletes.
Yeah, 100%. And they just battle either, late practices or, anything from, like, there's even soccer practices here in town that are from 8 to 10 p.m. And I think it goes even broader than that with the parents, like, having a hard time setting boundaries even with their kids on, maybe it's not the time to play 3 sports. Maybe this year we need to pick 1 or 2, and then pick a couple tournaments to go to that we think are going to be the best move for you as an athlete, versus like feeling like you have to sign up for everything for your kid to have a chance.
Yeah.
My experience working with these kids, and a lot of kids going off to colleges, is like, if you're good enough, there's a way that they can find you, and they will find you.
Yeah.
Not necessarily showing up to every tournament when you're 13 years old for soccer is going to get you a college scholarship, right? So
Absolutely. And you're right in that we live in such a different society now than we did, heck, even when you and I were kids. With social media now, coaches can see you, or scouting services can find you. You can get the accolades and the recognition without physically having to travel, and people are able to see you in person. And if you look at some of the stories of athletes, like the Currys didn't play AAU, at least not
Yeah.
until they were older. So it's like if you look at some of those athletes who are already at the top level of where you want your kids to be, if they bucked the trends and they did things a little bit differently, then maybe that's something that you as a parent should consider too. I think you got to pick and choose. I don't think that you can do everything. I think you're going to have a really stressed out and unhappy kid. I think you as a parent are going to be stressed out and unhappy, and the coaches are going to be upset because they're only getting like 20% of your kid because they're so overloaded.
Yeah. I love that. So let's jump over to mindfulness. What are some of the things you speak about or work with on the athletes in that regard?
I love talking about mindfulness because it really ties into what we were just saying. Kids are so stimulated these days. I mean, athletes are stimulated. You know, again, it's different than when we were younger. I was telling you on the call that I get a lot of coaches these days that want to talk about kids being soft and saying that they're not tough and you can't coach them the same way that you used to. And I disagree with that 100%. I think this generation of kids is so tough. Again, when we were young, you had to travel to another city to see good kids in that area. Now I can sit in my living room and I can see all of the top kids and all of my competition and all my highlights are up for people to criticize. I think this generation of kids is so tough because of the comparisons that they face on a regular basis. So I think that mindfulness is such a huge component because I think that you've got to have a safe space as an athlete and as a person, quite frankly, where you shut down for a little while and you don't expose yourself to any of that comparison. You don't give yourself any of that negative thought pattern. You just have a space where your mind is clear and your mind is free. So when I think about mindfulness, I think about one, like quieting the mind. Then two, I think about filling the mind up with good things like affirmations or meditations that are guided and kind of walk me through a mind body scan. And then after that, the third one that a lot of people don't talk about is I think sometimes you got to rewrite your negative limiting beliefs. Ideas like I can't do this and changing it to I can't do this yet. Or like everyone else is better than me. Like everyone else is better than me because I just started playing and I will eventually get to their skill level. I think a lot of times athletes develop negative beliefs because of expectations or things that other people said to them, and then they just let them stay. So I need that third part because even if I just quiet the mind and then I just look in the mirror and I'm like, I'm strong, I'm powerful, like all those things are great, but that negative stuff on a loop can really, really tear you down as an athlete. So I think you've got to find a way to challenge that, to interrupt some of that negative loop thinking so that you don't really get off track.
Yeah, I love that, and I mean I see that every day on the floor, especially when kids first start with us. Is you can just what they say, right? The way they frame a failure, or you
Mm-hmm.
propose a new challenge to them, whether that's adding weight, whether that's breaking a sprint PR or whatnot. And at first, I'll always have a lot of kids that'll be like, "Well, I can't do that," or "I don't know today," or "I hope," and then it's
Yeah.
just kind of having those conversations of like, well, let's like first off, let's not hope, let's visualize it, let's see it, and let's give our best effort towards it, whether you fail or succeed. To be able to learn from that, you need to give it your all and go
Yeah.
for it, and then you'll just see over time, you know, you don't hear those comments anymore of like I can't or I can't do this. They almost get a smile on their face when they're like, all right, let's go for it.
Yeah.
Cool.
And
So that's cool for me.
that's the beauty of strength and conditioning, is because I think that it gives you such a space to challenge those things. There's not as much pressure as there is in the skill practice. But it's just a really neat way to take them from a fixed mindset to a growth mindset. And that mindset book by, I think it's Carol Dweck, is such a great look at how we think. And I think a lot of times kids come in with that fixed mindset of, I can't, this is the way it is, I'm never going to, X, Y, Z. So to move them to that growth mindset of like, hey, I'm learning and I'm growing every day. Like, I'm trying my best. This might work out for me. Like, to move from that like negativity to that hopefulness is, I think, one of the best skills that we can give young athletes, because it's not just about sports. That carries over into the rest of your life.
Yeah, absolutely. And I like to think like most of the time with athletes, I see like a fixed mindset almost being like a fear-based mindset.
Yeah.
Like if you were to be able to see the video going on inside their head of like, either the sport they're playing or what they're doing in the weight room, like it's probably they're replaying in their head like a failure
Yeah.
or like a fear of, what could go the worst, what could be the worst. And I think flipping that into, seeing yourself complete visual, like in your head, visualizing successful reps or successful moments in sport, whether you've experienced them or not up to that point, can be really powerful. And I know for me as an athlete, when I played, I mean, those were my best games, is when I'd already seen myself kind of doing the things that happened on the field.
Yeah.
So,
Yeah. And you bring up a great point. Visualization is another great tool with mindfulness, and talking about seeing the good reps. And I also read something not too long ago that Michael Phelps used visualization a lot, and he used to visualize something going wrong. So if it did, then he would know how to handle it. And I don't know that I would personally do that, but you also can't argue with the results that that Michael
yeah,
Phelps. He told the story in conjunction with that, as he would visualize in his visualization practice different things going wrong, and so he said at one huge race, his goggles filled up with water, but instead of panicking, he had already visualized that happening, and so he knew, I just count the strokes, and I don't know, he probably he probably went on to win. So I think using visualization can be such a powerful tool for athletes, and the brain really can't distinguish the difference between an actual rep and a visualized rep. So if you as an athlete are taking some time to sit down, meditate, visualize, that's all part of that mindfulness. That's really helping to quiet your mind and rewrite some of those negative beliefs, like we said.
yeah, perfect. That's exactly what I wanted to touch on too for a lot of the kids and parents listening. So let's transition into, we have a lot of female athletes. I'd say we have a handful more than we do male athletes. And from your, expertise in working with female athletes, are there specific things you see potentially different or just more highlighted when working with them from an athlete perspective and also from a coach perspective?
Yeah, absolutely. So I think that when you're dealing with female athletes, you got a different human than a young male. I think when you look at young girls, a lot of them, one, started playing sport later on in life. Two, they don't have as much like individual practice time as boys do. And three, they don't have nearly as many hours of competition, right? You think about a young boy, he's probably playing on the playground at recess with his friends, or he's meeting up with his friends and they're playing basketball in the driveway, or he's dribbling in the basement. And I think for some of those reasons, when you look at middle school boys versus middle school girls, there's such a difference in their skill sets. And a lot of times it's because the boys have so many more hours of playing and practicing than what the girls do. You get a lot of girls that try out for middle school sports who have never played that sport before. So I think it's, when you're a coach, it's recognizing that you're dealing with much more of a young, new, fresh athlete than one that's already kind of well versed in their bodies. And so I think you've got to take extra time to help girls understand the proper movement patterns and help them understand how their body works and give them opportunities to experiment with it. I think that, again, boys have a lot of practice in that, and girls don't. So giving them the opportunity to kind of feel out their body and making it a safe space for them to make mistakes is also something that's crucial. There's some research out there that boys initially start playing sports for the competition of it and for the dominance of it. There's also some research out there that say that some girls start playing sports because of the connection and the community and the friendships. For that reason, girls very much so do not want to let people down, right? If I'm showing up because I want to make friends, or I'm showing up because I want to be part of a team, it's going to be very hard for me if I let people down. So as coaches, we've got to make it safe for girls to try and not get it, to try and fail, to try and just see what happens. A lot of girls just flat out don't want to try because they're so afraid of disappointing other people. It's not really even themselves. They don't want to disappoint the people around them. And so because of that, you see girls tend to quit sports at a much higher rate than boys do. In fact, there's a stat, girls from ages 8 to 14 tend to drop out of sports at a rate 2 to 3 times that boys do. So that means that for all the boys that keeps playing sports, all of those girls stop. It's because sports aren't really a safe place. So how do coaches make sports a safe place for girls? And I think it's a question that we're still trying to answer.
Yeah, I think part of that answer is, and I learned a lot through like the last 13 years of coaching, and being able to show up in different ways for different athletes. So just, and some people are born innately good at that, and some people, as a coach, it takes time to develop, but making sure you're being mindful in your coaching and just gauging interactions with athletes and what type of interaction is, has successful results with athletes. I've noticed it's with boys and girls, but particularly with girls too. Like, if you can't figure out what way to show up for them, even if it works for 2 out of the 3 girls, there might be a girl in that group that needs just a different way of delivering feedback and connecting with them. And some athletes you might, be very verbal with and talk with a lot and have a lot of different cues and information for. And some don't, respond to that well, and they just need to know that you love them and that, you give them little bits and pieces here, and then they kind of like to figure it out on their own. They don't want to be the spotlight or have everybody else, looking at them because coach is diving into them so much. So that's something that I realize, and I'm sure that you've seen as well.
Yeah, I don't think it's so much a gender thing as it is just an individual human thing. Like, how does this athlete need to be coached? Because you can ride some girls and they're fine. You can yell at some boys and they get upset and they withdraw. So it's one, really making sure that you can care about the kid and make them feel seen, heard, and acknowledged in some sort of way. And understand that that's going to be unique to different boys as it is unique to different girls. But I think to not understand some of the reasons why girls show up to begin with is kind of leaving some gaps open as a coach. So I think it's not, and make no mistake, I don't want a position at all that we need to be soft or we need to treat girls with like kids gloves. Like, I think you can treat a lot of girls the same way that you can treat a lot of boys, but you can't treat absolutely everybody the same. So I think kind of doing your due diligence as a coach to understand like what are some of the differences between boys and girls, make space for that. But then from there, like, treat everybody as the unique individual as they are. Because some girls that I have will talk the whole entire session. Some girls, it took a little while to open up. Some girls still never talk, So everybody's different. Everybody's different.
Yeah, 100%. Okay, so I'm excited for this part. We'll jump into some questions that some of the athletes that we have at our facility, some of the female basketball players wanted to ask you specifically.
Awesome.
One of them we've kind of hit on, but for a more specific answer, what would you recommend or what would help an athlete make it to that WNBA level?
I'm going to go back to my core 5 in conjunction with the second part. I think that the full answer is a lot of it is going to have to do with your preparation. And I think of preparation in 2 ways. I think about it. One is your skill work and making sure that you're understanding how to play your game, how to do all the technical things of your sport. But then I think the other way that you prepare well is by doing those 5 things off the court. You've got to do your lifting. You've got to do your nutrition, your hydration, your sleep, and your mindfulness. Like, all of those things plus your skill work, I think really give you the best opportunity to be successful. And not everybody figures it out at the same time. There are a lot of stories of athletes who were doing great things in college and who got to the WNBA and then decided, hey, like, it's time to level up a notch, and then really honed into strength and conditioning or nutrition, sleep, got specialized coaches for that. But I think as an athlete, the sooner that you can do that, the better. Because again, I just think if you're constantly putting yourself in the best possible position to be successful, like, good stuff is just going to happen for you. I really believe that. Really believe that.
Yeah. And I think the nugget right there too is, most of these athletes understand, like, okay, I need to be good at basketball. Like, I need to have the skill work. I need to be prepared.
Good.
Not a lot of athletes, think about what am I doing off the court. And in their defense, that's very hard to do in high school, to have that big picture of like, these things that need to happen, and very adult-like things that, will make a difference. And it's tough to do, but the athletes we have that I know are dialed in on that and listen to that stuff. The progress they make is insane, and the opportunities they get are amazing as well. And it's just like, when are you going to figure out it's worth taking that next step? And for some, like you said, it's earlier, and some of them it's later, and they just had that talent and the specific sports skill to be able to make it to where they did before they made that decision. But I would guarantee, no matter what level that is, WNBA even, it then helps them step up against the competition at that level as well. So
absolutely.
Yeah.
Well, and look, I'll tell you this too, because I talk about this during my speeches. I'll go through the whole thing. Here's the 5 things. Here's all these tangible stuff that you can do. And then I'm like, look, I know that sounds super overwhelming. Like, how am I going to do all of this in conjunction with everything else? And I got a simple, like, 2-step framework that I say. So I say, number 1, when you're an athlete, you got to pick the better of the 2 choices that are presented to you the majority of the time. Pick the better of the 2 choices that you have, right? Because, like, after practice, we'll just break down real quick. After practice, I have a choice. I can stay and lift, or I can go home. Better choice is to stay and lift. At night, I got a choice. I can stay up and scroll on TikToks, or I can go to bed. What's a better choice? Go to bed. When I go even to get fast food, I can either get the chicken salad, or I can get the burger with barbecue sauce and a large fry and a milkshake. Like, what's the better choice? This one, right?
Yeah.
So, like, just pick, like, don't get overwhelmed with it. But, like, in each moment, if you just make the decision that's going to propel you forward, the one that's going to fuel you towards success, you're going to be in a pretty good spot, right? So that's the first part. The second part is this: do the best that you can with what you got, right? Going back to that nutrition example, I might have to stop at the fast food place after the game, right? Like, I just might not have any other option, but I still have a choice. Like, I don't have to just derail everything just because circumstances aren't ideal. Because the reality is, things aren't going to be perfect. You're a high school athlete or a college athlete. Like, it's not always going to be ideal. But if I just make the best choice that I can, and then think about it, if I repetitively, like, do the best that I can with what I've got, and I repetitively try to make the best choice out of what's presented to me, I'm probably going to be in a pretty good spot. And that's what I want athletes to understand. Like, you don't have to do this every single decision, but if you want to be great, like, if you want to go to the next level, then you got to do it the majority of the time. And I think that tends to help athletes, because it's like, oh, okay, if I just start doing some of these things and then I start getting in a habit of it, I won't even have to think, like, do I stay and lift or go home after practice? I just lift, because that's now become part of who I am. But that choosing well at the beginning is how you start to create a habit. When you choose it over and over again, you create a habit. And then once you get some habits, you can just stack them. And then that's how you become really great and really efficient with your off the court stuff without really even realizing it, quite frankly.
Yeah. And that's super digestible. And I can attest to, like, as you make the better of the 2 choices each time and get in the habit, then all of a sudden you tend to find yourself in better overarching situations as well, as you're making the better choice. So 100%. I love that. Okay. So next question was, number 1 non-physical skill or attribute that is looked for, or like what you have found with the athletes at that level.
Confidence bordering on cockiness. And I get some pushback sometimes. People don't like the word cocky. I think that it's got some negative connotations to it, but I like it because I think it makes you feel something. And if you're an athlete and you're a competitor, I think sometimes you hear the word cocky and it's like a step up from confidence, right? Like, you can be confident, but if you're cocky, now you've got an even more unbreakable spirit. You've got even more of a belief in yourself. And so I think that those athletes at the top level, 1, they don't like to lose. So then 2, they don't behave in a way that would lend towards losing. and they just really believe in themselves. And I think a lot of kids these days tend to find more reasons why they can't than find reasons why they can and why they should and why it's totally possible for them. So I would absolutely say confidence bordering on cockiness while still being a really good teammate. Not a
Yeah.
ball.
Yeah.
Not but when I say confidence and cockiness, what I'm talking about is the belief in yourself. I'm not talking about how you behave. I'm talking about you feeling like, hey, if we're down 2 and there's 10 seconds left, I want them to run the play for me because I want the ball in my hands. I'm taking the shot to win the game. Like there's a certain level of confidence and cockiness that you got to have to be that type of player. And that's what
Yeah.
everybody that's in the WNBA, quite frankly, is like that because that's the best of the best. Everybody wants that. And that's what it takes to the next level.
I like that. I mean, in my life, I've been called cocky before, and kind of my response to it, or like what I tell my athletes too, because I've had this conversation before, is, it's got to start somewhere. So I think it's better. I'm like, would you rather be cocky and really believe in yourself, or would you rather, be the opposite of that and not believe in yourself? And I think, if you start believing in yourself first, and maybe it resembles cockiness, all of a sudden you have another person that you train with that's like, wow, they're pretty good. And then you got another person that train with that's pretty good. And all of a sudden you have a group of people around you that also believe in you. And then that elevates your ability to believe in that even yourself. So you kind of have to start that movement somewhere. And I always tell the athletes, like, that movement starts with you. Like, you have to, like, no one's going to believe in you really until you believe in yourself.
Absolutely.
You know what I'm saying? Like, you'll have a coach that believes in you or whatever, but it's like, if you want your teammates to buy into you and trust you as being one of the better players on the team, and letting you be in those situations to be successful, like, you've got to already, believe that and have visualized that and like are set on that for yourself. So,
well, I think it's tough too. I might tangent a little bit here, Darren, but hang on, I'll bring it back. Sometimes when I use the word cocky, especially to describe or to when I say it to young girls, I get parents who buck up against that because society likes girls to fit in a box, to be polite, to be respectful, to be humble. And so the word cocky to them doesn't necessarily mean like a belief in yourself. It means like behavior towards other people. Like, we don't like cocky people. We don't want you to be a cocky girl. And it's like I get it. And I'm not trying to teach anybody to be disrespectful, but also like the best athletes believe in themselves to like the nth degree. And when we think about so many times, like girls, or I shouldn't say girls, women not applying for jobs unless they feel overqualified, right? Where a man will apply being like 50% qualified. Or we think about women not getting the same amount of money as men. Like, at some point, you got to teach girls how to believe in themselves and believe that they are worth something and believe that they are worthy. And so if we're constantly just pushing this narrative of like girls should be polite and girls should be humble and girls shouldn't take what's theirs, like, we're not necessarily setting girls up to be successful women in society. And that's where I don't know that we have to rewrite the definition of cockiness, but I do think that we've got to challenge some of those beliefs on what it means to actually believe in yourself and then what that does for you later on in life. So I think that, your belief in yourself, like you said, has to start somewhere. And someone said to me a while ago, like, it's much easier to take cocky and bring it down to confident than it is to take totally unassuming, like no belief in yourself and bring you like all the way up to cocky. I'd rather have to like help somebody come down and be a little bit less cocky and try to take somebody with no confidence and get them to believe in themselves. Because that's really hard. The only place that the belief in yourself can come is from you.
Yeah. I love that. And I think that also, it's easy for outsiders to, even if it's just confidence in yourself and you are that great teammate and you are that person, like, you're probably going to get called cocky by people that wish that they, had reached that level yet, or
Absolutely.
just see you from the outside. So I wouldn't be afraid as an athlete to of hearing that word cocky. Just make sure you're being, a good teammate and your belief in yourself is also to uplift those around you and be the best person around them you can be. So,
well,
I
and
like that.
everybody's darling right now, Caitlin Clark. I think Caitlin Clark
Yeah.
is cocky. I'd say it to her
Oh, yeah.
face. I think she's cocky, but I also think she's incredibly humble and respectful and just a great human being. So like if Caitlin Clark can be cocky, then why can't your daughter be cocky?
Yeah. She's changing. She's really changing, and some other athletes, but they're changing, the WNBA or future WNBA as a whole. I think I think this tournament right now going on was one of the most viewed tournaments ever for female sports. So that's just awesome, and amazing. And I love that. Last one, which again, swing back to something we've probably talked about before, but what is the hardest thing for athletes at that level that they struggle with? So common things you see at that level.
All right, so I'm gonna tell you this little nugget first. So when I first started in the WNBA, I would see this pattern happen year after year, and it was this: you'd have a rookie come in, she'd make the team her first year. So let me backpedal a second. So you're playing like winter season college basketball, then you come and you make the WNBA, you play summer, then you go overseas typically because that's where the money is in women's basketball. You'd play overseas, and then you'd get cut right before the start of your second WNBA season. And the first time I saw it, I was like, oh, that's kind of weird. And then it happened again and again and again and again. And I was like, what is going on here? And what it really boils down to, Darren, is that they stopped doing all of those things that got them there. They stopped doing so much off the court preparation. They stopped maybe doing so much skill work. It's almost this idea that like they thought they had made it. They thought that they were good. Like, oh, I'm a pro. I did it. But everything that was a building block to get them there, they stopped doing. And when they stop doing that, you come on this like downward slope, this downward trajectory. When you're playing D1, they are telling you like every minute of your day is scripted. Here's what time study tables are. Here's when you live. Here's all the food. Then you come to the WNBA. I mean, I'll just be honest. Like, we're paying you. Like, I'm going to tell you to do something, but if you don't do it, like, I'm not holding your hand the same way that someone is in the college level. So you start to probably slack off a little bit during WNBA season because, like, we will get rid of you. We will replace you. You will get cut if you don't do what you're supposed to do. Like, you're a pro. This is your job. We're not holding your hand. So your habits maybe started to slip a little bit during WNBA season. When you go overseas, now you're away from friends and family. You really probably started to get away from that. Then you come back to training camp and you're up against somebody who has just done everything that they had been doing in college, right? So they're in really great shape. They're really well fed from a nutrition standpoint. They're ready to go. And you're like kind of slow, kind of sluggish. You're not like, you're just not ready. And coaches will look at players and be like, I'm going to take the unproven one over the one that I already gave a spot and then rewarded me by showing up a second year, not in peak physical condition, or not ready to go. So I think you really got to understand that as an athlete, it's a never ending cycle of taking care of yourself and refining your game. I mean, you look at LeBron James and the longevity of his career, whether you like him or hate him, but there's something to be admired about the amount of miles on his body. But he has taken care of himself at such a high level for so many years. Like you get it. But for every, for LeBron James, there's probably 100, 200, 300 other guys that, I mean, I don't want to say had the same potential, but had the opportunity to at least take care of their body in that manner and didn't. So what are you doing to take care of yourself? What are you doing for your physical health? What are you doing for your mental health to help you stay at the top level? Because it's one thing to just get there. It's another thing to stay there.
Yeah, I agree with that 100%. I even see that on a micro scale, with successful high school athletes, like training really hard, getting the season, having some success, and then kind of backing off on everything that made them successful.
Yeah.
And then they come back in 3 or 4 months later and you're like, well, we got quite a bit. You're about 60% of what you were. So now we got to build that back up. Like, and so,
yeah.
And I think that's a huge life lesson to be learned. And, ideally you learn it before it becomes you getting cut out of the WNBA, but in jobs and life and parenting and relationships, it's like you can't get to something, get to a certain level that you want to get to, and then drop everything that got you there and expect to continue to reap the rewards, right?
Yeah.
So I love it. So man, this has been flying by. We're already at 50 minutes. Let's do just a minute if you have anything you want to share or any recommendations you have for parents or athletes listening, and then we'll close it out.
Yeah, I think that you can do all of those 5 things that we talked about. You can do all of the skill work. So basically, you can do all the preparation that you want, but if you don't believe in yourself, then it's not going to mean a whole lot. I really think that the confidence is the key. And I think that the more as an athlete you focus on building your confidence. Now, it's kind of circular because your confidence comes from your preparation, right? Like I'm confident because I know that I put in the work. I know that I'm prepared. I know that I'm ready to go. But if you haven't done the preparation and you haven't done the work, then you can't really be truly confident. And if you're not confident, then it's not going to mean that much, because you got to be confident in your ability to perform when you get out on the court. So I talk about confidence in a key to confidence framework, and I think about the K as keep going. And I think that this is helpful for a lot of athletes. So I'm going to share it quickly. When I think about keep going, I think about this idea that like the only way that you truly lose is if you quit. Like things aren't always going to happen on your timeline. Sometimes it's not your time. Like sometimes you need to sit a year. Sometimes you need to take a little bit longer. But like you got to keep going in order to truly have success. The second one, the E, stands for eyes up. And I think when you're a young kid and you're learning how to play basketball, they always tell you can't look down when you dribble. You got to keep your eyes up so that you can see everything. And I think a lot of times athletes just look down at what's right in front of them and they don't see the big picture. Like they get so hung up on, oh, this one AAU coach, this one season, and it's like, yo, that's such a microcosm of your entire athletic career. Like, let's just get through it or let's just quit. But like, it's not that big of a deal. So it's like, how do you reframe some of those negatives into positives? And I think you do that by picking your eyes up and seeing things from a broader lens. And then the last one, Y, stands for you matter. I think so many kids these days get pigeonholed into something because somebody else said so. Like, oh, you're going to be a defensive player. Okay, well, you might not be the greatest shooter right now, but like if you want to be a really great offensive player, work on it, right? Like you don't have to be defined by someone else's opinion of you. So you can't let that stop you. And then in conjunction with that, like you matter to me also means that you are more than just an athlete. You're more than just your sport. You'll be more than your sport when you stop playing it. So finding ways to like have self-worth outside of your sport, I think is also super important. So then if you have a bad game, like the whole world doesn't have to crumble because you're still a good daughter, a good friend, a good teammate, XYZ. Like your value can't be so intrinsically tied to your performance. So keep going, eyes up, and you matter. And that's the key to confidence.
That was fire. That was probably one of the best conclusions we've had yet.
Thanks, Darren.
I just can't emphasize enough for athletes listening, like how thankful we are that Chrissy will hop on and share this with us and, take notes on it and make your board of the 5 cores and, start to make that progress and, build that confidence through action and through continuing to keep your eyes up and moving forward. And there's so much potential for, everyone listening to this, whether it's collegiate sports or not. All these things can carry over into your life and, help you down the road, and something that will, progress you as a parent, as a worker, as a business owner, and whatnot. So I appreciate your time, Chrissy.
Awesome. Thank you so much for having me, Darren. It's a blast.
Yep.